Father Philip ending, Ignatius as a leader. Give me 2 or 3 things that he did really well as a leader.
Okay. I think I would signal out 3 things. Firstly, the way he wrote the exercises and the constitutions. We know that he himself had an extraordinarily rich spiritual life. But what he seems to have been able to do in a way that almost no other saint in the history of the Church has managed is to keep his own personality out of those 2 key documents. They're documents that enable other people to make the same sort of discovery as he did, but not necessarily in his particular way. He doesn't want us to hero worship him. And that's probably why he didn't want to write the autobiography. I suppose the second thing is his ability to attract really good people around him. I mean, just last night I was looking at Xavier's letters again for the purposes of something we're doing here where I'm recording at the moment. And I'm just struck by the extraordinary human and spiritual quality of those letters. Now you can multiply that by at least 3 or 4 among the first companions. You've got Laïnès, you've got Salmeron, you've got Favre as well as Xavier, all of whom are really considerable religious figures in their own right. And then a new generation. He identifies Juan Polanco as his secretary. He sees the gifts of Nadal and uses them well. I think the third thing I'd say is the way in which he managed change. They arrive in Rome as 10 friends in the Lord and maybe a few more hangers-on. By the time he dies, for reasons largely outside his control, it's become a society of about 1,000 members on 3 continents, and this in 16th century communication conditions. And he had to reinvent, he had to make it become a very different sort of society. Now, our textbooks are fixated on the myth of God having revealed everything in Manresa, and they tend to hide the level of change and flexibility that was required of the Jesuits when they arrived in Rome. But in fact, it was quite remarkable, and he was able to let go of many things he held dear and start doing other things. It was pretty chaotic, and it took them about 30 or 40 years after he died to sort it out. But it was a creative chaos, and it was a chaos that eventually stabilized into something that was remarkably productive for several centuries.
1 or 2 things that he might have got not so right. Let's not say wrong, but not so right.
Well, if you look at the record kept by a man called Luis Gonçalves de Câmara, who took down the dictatorship of the autobiography, Luis Gonçalves de Câmara also basically stalked Ignatius for a year or so and simply wrote down everything he saw and heard. And you have some remarkably wise and liberal things that he says, and then you also have the sense that sometimes Ignatius has just lost his temper and is exercising authority in a quite irrational and arbitrary manner. Of course, we tend to think he's a saint, so there must have been some sort of justification for that, but I'm really not so sure.
And listen, part 9 of the Constitution is the portrait of the general. What's underneath that? What's behind that? What's important in that?
Yeah. Well, my dear friend and fellow British Jesuit Nick Austin wrote a remarkable piece in preparation for GC 36 on how that whole chapter 2 of part 9 draws on virtue theory and is something of a set piece coming from the best of Aristotle and Cicero. It's a good piece, it's quite simple, and it's worth reading. I have to say, when I've worked with orders of sisters trying to elect a general in the light of these constitutions, I've tended to stress the last bit. I mean, Ignatius has basically given us 6 virtues that could more or less be summarized, to use the cliche, as Jesus H. Christ on one of his better days. But at the end, he says, if we don't have that, there needs to be at least love of the society and good judgment. And I think his ability to let go of those 6 huge virtues and just come down to the 2 things that are absolutely indispensable, there's a rightness of touch there that I greatly admire.
Finally, one thing. We're recording this especially for a workshop in northern India.
Yeah.
Give us one piece of wisdom that you might like to share with this group. It's a special recording we're making. One piece of wisdom, one piece of Ignatian heritage that you think can be valuable.
Have the courage to think differently. Indian Christianity, the Indian Society of Jesus, was a European foundation. Now it may well be that Indian Christianity and the Indian Society of Jesus has to prepare to become the cultural centre. Have the courage to think big, and have the courage to do that.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Philip Henley.